Okay, well, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from group 12, and today in this video, we will present our material under the title Communicative Language Approach. So next slide, please. So our group consists of Ainun Nurizati, Alia Zalzabila, Anissa Awad, Varianti Dwi Safitri, and Rido Ananda Wirabumi. Next slide, please. So in this presentation, we will deliver 5 submaterials. The first one is we will discuss about definition of communicative language approach, and then we will discuss about traditional communicative language approach, the ongoing transformation, and principal communicative language approach. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, after the last material, we will discuss about characteristic of communicative language approach. So the first material will be delivered by me, Ainun Nurizati. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. The first material is about the definition of communicative language approach. So communicative based approach is defined as an approach of teaching a second or foreign language that focuses on learning interaction, whether as the means or the ultimate goal of learning a target language. Interaction here is mean an activity in which two or more parties affect upon another. And the next one is CLT or CLR, refers to communicative approach to the teaching a second or foreign language as well. Doubtlessly, it's believed that as the most effective approach focus on the communicative competence of the learners in many countries. So when we are talking about communicative-based approach, there is an activity that the learners are active to participate or contribute in learning process. Next slide, please. So the communicative language learning approach is a product created in response to the need of appropriate approach in language teaching process. In here, the example is practicing question forms by asking learner to find out personal information about their colleagues is an example of the communicative approach, as it involves meaningful communication. This new approach provides communicative competence as well as linguistic competence in real communication. The learners know how and when to say what to whom, and eventually CLT is found as the most effective way to teach a second or foreign language. So he must cite in Larsen Freeman state that this approach, communicative approach, is the most effective way to teach a foreign or the second language, because this communicative technique contribute to the rapid acquisition of the student's speaking skill. In CLE, the student must learn to establish contact with the lecturer, to be able to put himself in the place of another and cope with the current situation of communication. As a result, the psychological barrier of fear of a language mistake is removed and the opportunity to express an opinion is provided. So the next material is about the traditional communicative language approach that will be delivered by Rido Ananda. So Rido Ananda, the screen is yours.
All right, so thank you for the chance. Now I would like to present about the next material is about the traditional communicative approach. Next slide, please. Next slide. For the introduction. So communicative language teaching was introduced at the beginning of the 1970s by British and American scholars to promote the teaching of usable communicative skills in L2 instruction. Although it was seen by many as a counter-action to the audiolingual method that dominated the 1960s, the main goal of CLT to develop a functional communicative L2 competence in the learners was actually similar to the primary audiolingual objective. However, CLT pursued the communicative agenda in a radically different manner. Instead of the audiolingual attempt of trying to build up an implicit L2 knowledge based through drilling and memorization, CLT methodology was centered around the learner's participatory experience in meaningful L2 interaction in often simulated communicative situations, which underscore the significance of the less structured and more creative language tasks. For this reason, the learning of scripted dialects was replaced by games, problem-solving tasks, and unscripted situational role plays, and pattern drilling was either completely abandoned or replaced by communicative drills. Next slide, please. The second one about audiolingualism. At the heart of the audiolingual or CLT difference lay a basic contrast in orientation. Audiolingualism was associated with a specific learning theory, behaviorism, and therefore it was the first language teaching method that consciously aspired to build on the principles of 1970s of the psychology of learning, whereas the communicative reform in the 1970s was centered around the radical renewal of the linguistic course, content without any systematic psychological conception to guide the actual process of learning to accompany it. This is well illustrated by the fact that while the linguistic content of communicative syllabus was informed by a number of cutting-edge theoretical strands, such as Austin in 1962 and Searles in 1969 speech act theory. Next slide, please. The third one about the vagueness. The vagueness of the seeking situational meaning tenet in third resulted in a fair wide of range of variants of CLT in terms of actual classroom application in both the UK and the USA. Richards and Rogers in 2001, chapter 155, have rightly pointed out in respect of CLT that there is no single text or authority on it, nor any single model that is universally accepted as authoritative. As one extreme, for example, people often associate CLT with strictly no grammar approach, epitomized by Presence in 1985, the input hypothesis. The last one is about implicit versus explicit language learning. Explicit learning refers to the learner's conscious and deliberate attempt to master some material or solve a problem. This is the learning type emphasized by most school instruction. In contrast, implicit learning involves acquiring skills and knowledge without conscious awareness, that is, automatically with no conscious attempt to learn them. Amongst language teachers, the emerging view of a typical communicative classroom has been that it should approximate a naturalistic language acquisition environment as closely as possible, thereby providing plenty of authentic input to feed the students' implicit learning processes. I think that's all for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carido. So the next material is about the The next material will be delivered by Feria. So Feria, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Okay, next material is ongoing transformation of CLA. Next slide, please. The ongoing transformation, as we saw above, relying on purely implicit learning approach has turned out to be less than successful in L2 learning in general, and therefore the past decade has seen a gradual transformation for our idealist CLT image. In her summary of this shift, Nina Spada 2007 p. 271 explained that most second approach language educators agree that CLT is undergoing a transformation, one that includes increased recognition of the attention to language form within exclusively or primarily meaning-oriented CLT approach to second language instruction. It was in this vein that 1997 Marin, Kels, Murcia, Sarah, Tarrell, and Isaac suggest Sales, Marcia et al. 1997, see also 1998, that CLT has arrived at a new phase that we term the principal communicative in sum. We believe that CLT has arrived at a turning point. Explicit direct elements are gaining significance in teaching communicative abilities and skills. Next slide, please. The emerging new approach can be described as a principal communicative approach by bringing the gap between current research on aspects of communicative competence and actual communicative classroom practice. This approach has the potential to synthesize direct knowledge-oriented and indirect skill-oriented teaching approach. Therefore, rather than being a complete departure from the original indirect practice of CLI, it extends and further develops CLT methodology. Sel Murcia et al. 1997, column 147. Thus, it seems to me that this research for integration has been most fruitful direction of language teaching methodology over the past decade, with the most forward-pointing development in research targeting the various modes of the explicit-implicit interface taking place in three central areas. The first one is A, focus on form and form-focused instruction. Focus on form and form-focused instruction indicate a concern with the structural system of language from a communicative perspective. In other words, they span a halfway position between a concern for communicative meaning and linguistic features of the language code. The second one is fluency and automatization. Form-focused instruction has been primarily concerned with linguistic accuracy and the knowledge of grammatical structure, but everybody who has even tried to speak in a foreign language know that the accurate use of linguistic form is not the only and often not even the most serious concern with regard to communicative effectiveness. In many respects, L2 fluency is equally, if not more, important. And the last one is formulaic language. There is something fundamental about formulaic language, such as lexical phrases, idioms, conventionalized expression, collocation, or all. Overview C. Submit 2004, Prey, and 2008. For example, a good 2 decades ago, that communicative competence is not a matter of knowing rules. Okay, I think that's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vera. So the next material is about the principle of language teaching approach will be delivered by Anissa Awad. So Anissa, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you. The next slide, please. Okay, thank you. The next material is 7 principle of the principal communicative approach. The first principle is the personal significance principle. Principal communicative approach, or PCS, should be meaning, focus, and personally significant as a whole. This has been the basic tenet of student-centered communicative language teaching for the past 25 years, and I believe that this principle is just as valid now as when it was first formulated. The second principle is the controlled practice principle. While the overall purpose of language learning is to prepare the learners for meaningful communication, skill learning theory suggests that, similar to the training of musicians and athletes, it should also include controlled practice activities to promote the automation of second language skill. The purpose of this practice should be clearly explained to the learners, and the content or format should be made as motivating as possible within the text internet constraints. The next is the declarative input principle. To provide jump starts for subsequent automation, PCA should contain explicit initial input competence. This declarative input can be overridden in several ways, including the potential utilization of accelerated learning techniques and rote learning. The next is the focus on form principle. While maintaining an overall meaning-oriented approach, PCA should also pay attention to the formal or structural aspect of the second language that determine accuracy and appropriateness at the linguistic, discourse, and pragmatics level. An important hallmark of good teaching is finding the optimal balance between meaning-based of form-focused activities in the dynamic classroom context. The next principle is the Formulaic Language principle. PCA should include the teaching of Formulaic language as a featured competence. There should be sufficient awareness raising of the significance and purpose of formulaic language in real-life communication, and selected process should be practiced and recycled intensively. Okay, the next is the language export principle. PCA should offer learners extensive export to large amounts of second language input that can fit the learner's implicit learning mechanics. In order to make the most of this exposure, learners should be given some explicit preparation in terms of pre-text activities to prime the for maximum insight. And the last one is the focus interaction principle. PCA should offer learners ample opportunities to participate in genuine second language interaction. For best effect, such communicative practice should always have a specific. Such communicative practice should always have a specific formal or functional focus and should always be associated with target process to practice. Okay, I think that's all for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the last materials is about characteristic of second communicative language approach. Will be delivered by Alia Zalsabila. So Alia, the screen is yours.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity. I will explain about characteristic of communicative language teaching. The sums characteristic of language teaching or communicative language approach. The first one is syllabus. The next slide, please. Okay. There are some characteristics of CLT in language teaching classroom. They are syllabus, classroom activity materials, and tasks and rules of teacher and student. The first one is syllabus. Syllabus is an outline of a plan that will be achieved in a big process of teaching. A syllabus which contains CLT or communicative language teaching approach provides space for teacher of language to develop learning materials and activity in a lesson plan about the target language. According to Van E.K. in the 1980s say that there are 6 basic functions in the form of communicative language teaching approach syllabus. The first one is imparting and seeking factual information, and the second is expressing and finding out intellectual attitude, and the next is expressing and finding out emotional attitudes, and the fourth is expressing and finding out moral attitudes, and the next is getting things done, and then the last one is socializing. I think those all function in the syllabus will create communicative language teaching by different realization based on the form of specific role with specific situation. And the second is classroom activity. There are many communicative activities could be applied in CLT or communicative language teaching. But particularly some typical communicative activity in CLT, which facilitate the interaction among learners of the target language in a classroom, are group discussion, simulation, and role play. And the next slide, please. Okay, and third is task and materials. Communicative tasks give opportunity for the learners of target language to express and use the target language. By using student communicative materials, the learners are set into the atmosphere when the language used according to the context, time, and situation of real life. So, according to Richard and Rogers in the 1986, agree that there are 3 kinds of material which bring CLT, communicative language teaching approach in language teaching. The first is authentic materials, transfer what the learners cannot learn from outside the classroom and express natural language to learn in a variety of situations. And the second is task-based materials give change to the target language learns to use target language through certain rules. And the last one is text-based materials provide a theme, task analysis, or practice situation description in the communication among the user of target language. And the last one about the characteristic of communicative language teaching or communicative language approach is the roles of teacher and learners. The concept of CLT approach is learn-centered. The role of the teacher here is expected as a facilitator who can bring learners of the target language into the communicative learning atmosphere. Teacher makes communicative teaching plan and apply it in a classroom activity that make all the students interact in the classroom communicatively. The learner's role in CLT is the most important. Why? Because they are the communicator of the language teaching process. As communicators, they are in change is in negotiating the meaning of their communication, trying to understand and gain the meaning of others' message in the communication using their competence in target language. I think that's all for explanation about the characteristic of communicative language teaching or communicative language approach. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's all our presentation about the communicative language approach. Thank you guys for your kind attention. If you have any question, please feel free to ask through WhatsApp group. We will close our presentation by saying alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, rabbil alamin. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.